Hello, my name is Stephanie Argueta, and I am a student at Rutgers University, Newark. I am currently enrolled in the summer 2020 course, America and the World, with instructor Dr. Mita Saxena. Today we will be discussing transnational terrorism, specifically non-military and non-traditional threats to the United States in the post-9/11 era. We will be discussing the counter-terroristic strategies that were made by 3 presidents following the 9/11 attacks. Those presidents are President George Bush, President Barack Obama, and President Donald Trump. In doing so, we will also discuss what domestic and systemic factors influence these strategies and how it affected American foreign policy decisions. And lastly, we will end this presentation with advice on how our next and future presidents can approach transnational terrorism. This is the sequence we will follow today. What are transnational threats? What is transnational terrorism? U.S. national strategies to combat transnational terrorism, the benefits resulting from the U.S. security choices, and the disadvantages from U.S. security choices. And lastly, we will end with advice that I have for the next U.S. president. So, what is transnational threat? A transnational threat is threats that arise in a traditional and non-traditional way. A traditional way consists of state actors such as military threats from other countries, and a non-traditional way consists of non-state actors such as non-military threats. Examples of this are the 9/11 attacks such as Al-Qaeda, a broad militant Islamic organization founded by Osama bin Laden, or ISIS, a military terrorist group known as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. There are also cyber attacks that are simply virtual attacks that can come from any person or group of people. And lastly, there are bioterror attacks that come in the form of infectious diseases. To reiterate, today we will be focusing primarily on terrorism and the post-9/11 era, which includes Al-Qaeda and ISIS. What is transnational terrorism? It is the unlawful use of violence, especially against civilians, in pursuit of political aims that extends across national boundaries. It is also the threat of violence by non-state actors to influence citizens or governments in the pursuit of political and social change. Now, terrorism can come in different shapes and forms. Such forms are assassinations, bombings, aerial attacks, for example 9/11, and also can come in the form of car hijackings. With that being said, the United States has been a target to many terroristic groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. As a result of this, the United States had to come up with counter-terroristic strategies to combat terrorism, which we will discuss in the next few slides. So, U.S. strategies to combat transnational terrorism. The first, the 2003 National Strategy to Combat Terrorism strategy, which was during the Bush era. In the wake of 9/11 terrorist attacks, President Bush launched an international war on terrorism that was defined by military intervention, national building, and efforts to reshape the politics in the Middle East. The intent of this national strategy was to stop terrorist attacks against the United States and its citizens and allies, and to create an international environment that would be inhospitable to terrorists and anyone who supported them. This national strategy also took a counter-terroristic approach. Thus, the counter-terroristic immediately became President Bush's highest priority. Congress supported Bush by authorizing the use of military force against those responsible for the 9/11 attacks. President Bush implied a counter-terroristic strategy, which created the Homeland Security. It had massive surveillance by the NSA. It had preventative warfare, preemptive warfare, and it included the 4D strategy, which I will discuss in the next slide. The 4D strategy. After the attacks of 9/11, terrorism took center stage in the national security policy and the approach was a far more aggressive and expansive strategy known as 4D approach. The 4D approach is comprised of four primary missions. First, defeat terrorist organizations with global reach. Second, deny organizations sanctuaries from which to operate and launch. Third, diminish the conditions that give rise to use of terrorism. And lastly, the fourth, defend the United States through proactive defense of homeland. The logic of the Bush strategy was straightforward. In order to prevent attacks against the United States in the short term, Al-Qaeda and similar terroristic organizations had to be disrupted and their capabilities degraded. Next is the 2006 National Security Strategy, which is simply an addendum to the 2003 strategy. This strategy has two pillars. The first pillar is promoting freedom, justice, and human dignity, working to end tyranny and to promote effective democracies. It states that the survivor of liberty in our own land increasingly depends on the success of liberty in other lands. The best hope for peace in our world is the expansion of freedom in all of the world. Peace and international stability are most reliably built on the foundation of freedom. The second pillar of this strategy is confronting the challenges of our time by leading a growing community of democracies. It states that effective multinational efforts are essential to solve problems such as terrorism. Yet history has shown that only when the U.S. does its part will other nations do theirs. For this reason, America will continue to lead. Next, third on our list is the 2015 National Security Strategy. Unlike President Bush, President Obama was skeptical about the efficacy of using military power as his primary counter-terroristic tool. For this reason, the term global war on terror was replaced with countering violent extremism. Obama sought to avoid new military commitments and assemble coalitions and basically lead from behind. Now, this was different from the Bush administration, whose strategy did not include coalitions, and in fact, it disregarded the UN's position of global war on terror. Obama also renewed the idea of tackling the root causes of terrorism, which are poverty, corruption, and oppression. There was also a point in time during the Obama era where ISIS forces strengthened and the Iraqi defenses weakened. And as a result of this, Obama was forced to renew military operations and to prevent further massacres and ISIS from becoming a new base for terrorist operations. Drone use and drone warfare massively expanded under the presidency of Obama. He ordered 10 times more counter-terror attacks than his predecessor, President Bush. His strategy was to reduce the need for ground operations like 2003's invasion of Iraq. And his major achievement through drone warfare was the killing of Osama bin Laden. Next, his NSS strategy called for security, prosperity, values, and international order. It was a U.S. multinational leadership in the world, and it had emphasis on non-military forms of power. And finally, the NSS focuses on alliances and partnerships, such as the Joint Comprehensive Plan Action Agreement. Now, and our fourth strategy is the America First national security strategy during the Trump era. Trump's approach is a unilateral approach that deters the U.S. from imposing our values on other countries. This approach has three pillars: the national security, domestic security, and border protection with enhanced immigration laws. Trump emphasizes that enhanced security and strength equates to restoring peace. Because President Trump inherited the war in Afghanistan and the ongoing war against ISIS, many people regarded this as more dangerous and complicated than the situation that Obama inherited. With that being said, Trump has always been very combative about going after ISIS, promising the United States that he will defeat them. Trump sees his military as the principal instrument of power, which he felt that Obama constrained from. In related foreign policy matters, Trump believes that the agreement negotiated in 2015, as I discussed in the previous slide, regarding Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Trump feels that this was a bad deal for the United States and that we should get rid of it. Next, Trump has also reduced his predecessor's emphasis on soft power and human rights. During his campaign, he has mentioned that, in contrast to Obama, he would fill and encourage the use of military prisons such as Guantanamo Bay. And lastly, Trump also portrays radical Islamic terrorism as a foreign threat against America, which we should protect with stronger borders, travel restrictions, reductions in immigration, and extreme vetting of those who want to come into the United States. There are benefits of the U.S. security approach on transnational terrorism. As we look back at America post 9/11 and the benefits, we find many positives. 3 positives that I found are many terrorists were captured and killed, specifically Osama bin Laden, which was the founder of Al-Qaeda. He was killed during the Obama presidency through drone warfare, which was Obama's strategy. Next, there were no further catastrophic terroristic attacks in the United States since 9/11, only many smaller attacks. And lastly, most homegrown terrorist plots have been uncovered. While there are many benefits to the U.S. counterterrorism choices, there have been many disadvantages. 3 disadvantages that I have found are post 9/11 hasn't made America appreciably safe. In fact, there has been an increase in the rate of terrorism on U.S. soil, even though they have not been as massive as 9/11. Also, the United States has not destroyed or defeated Al-Qaeda entirely, and as a result, it increases global terrorist attacks continue. And lastly, the most important, fear of the menace of terrorism has become a permanent feature of the American psyche, which has been exploited politically and through media. It has paved the way for Muslim bans, discrimination, and attacks. Below to your right, you will see a bar chart of anti-Muslim attacks on U.S. soil since 2001. Clearly, there has been an increase compared to 2016. And lastly, what can the next U.S. president do to tackle transnational terrorism? My advice: let's move proactively instead of reactively. Transnational terrorism is unpredictable. We cannot determine when the next non-traditional, non-military attack will be. Considering the history of national security strategies, we must not wait to have a strategic plan in place. All 3 presidents in this presentation has had a different approach on terrorism. However, they had 2 things in common. 1, they dealt with a different form of terrorism, and 2, their main objective is to protect the American people. At this moment, I believe an approach that is equally unilateral and multilateral is necessary. In terms of power, the U.S. should take a unilateral approach to ensure economic prosperity. In terms of peace and principles, we must continue a multilateral approach that promotes global democracy. In doing so, we reassure our allies that we are adhering to collaborative efforts of world peace. Furthermore, examining the history of the national security strategies is critical in deciphering what a reactive response would be versus a proactive response. I believe that a global mediation group should be assembled, one that integrates the demands of democratic countries, non-democratic countries, and transnational terroristic groups. To my point, we should not wait on a terroristic attack or domestic factors, pressures to seek revenge, public opinion, or systemic notion that we should defend ourselves to be the drivers of our decisions in foreign policy. Rather, we should reach out to the world and ask what we should do to get rid of the root causes of terrorism. Thank you for your time.